Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Walker, Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Overland Park Chamber. With me today is Gina Knapp, a candidate for Blue Valley Board of Education. Today we're going to spend some time getting to know Gina and learn about her candidacy and her priorities if elected to the school board. Gina, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. Let's start by having you take a few minutes to introduce yourself and tell us why you're running for the Blue Valley School Board.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up here in Johnson County, going to the great public schools that we have. I have 3 children currently in the Blue Valley School District, 2 in middle school and 1 in high school at Northwest. And I currently work in youth development nonprofit. So I've done that for the last 10 years on the finance side, dealing with complex federal, state, and local funding related to youth serving organizations, 21st century funding and things of that sort. I'm running for office because I've spent the last 15 years advocating for my oldest child who has special needs. He's hard of hearing, and you can imagine the pandemic's made that a little bit more challenging for him. But advocating for him to get what he needs as far as accommodations and the equal opportunity for education has shown me that there's a need for more of a voice for special education students, and that's what prompted me to run.
Well, fantastic. And now we'll turn our attention to a few questions, and you've touched on this a little bit with this first one, but as a candidate, what are your top education policy issues?
Right. So my top 3 priorities if I was elected to serve on the board is, first of all, coming out of the pandemic, the learning loss that all students have experienced is a huge thing that we need to focus on. And we are currently focusing on it with additional reading resources, et cetera, with ESSER funding. So we need to continue to be focusing on that. The second one is mental health coming out of the pandemic, not just for students, but for administrators and teachers also. Isolation and things like that coming out of the pandemic have been very difficult for a lot of people. Anxiety is at an all-time high. And so we need to continue focusing on mental health, normalizing mental health issues and things like that is a passion area for me. And then the third one is just continuing to build on the excellence of Blue Valley as a school district. We have been ranked just as recently as a couple weeks ago by Niche Magazine. Our 5 high schools were the top 5 in Kansas. Our middle and elementary school, same thing. Forbes has named us the top 10% of public school districts in the country. So continuing to build upon the excellence that Blue Valley is known for, reimagining learning to build the future of our community.
The Kansas Supreme Court ruled the current K-12 education funding formula is both equitable and adequate. The court, however, has retained jurisdiction over the case to assure funding is maintained. What are your thoughts on the formula and additional funding that has been added?
So I do agree that at the state level, that in order to keep equity across the state, that they should be allocating it at that level. However, we continue to be unfunded, specifically in special education. Special education has never been funded at more than 80%, which then comes out of whether it's paras or teachers, not having as many special ed teachers, because special ed is a separate bucket of the funding when it's allocated. We continue to be underfunded by the Kansas legislature, and we need to, especially as board members, be advocating in Topeka to fill those buckets.
And the K-12 education system requires accountability measures for student performance, and sometimes that's been a source of debate. Please describe the accountability measures you support and that you believe are accurately reflective of student achievement.
Sure. So we know that test scores don't fully reflect how well our students are doing. I don't have the answer to what does reflect how well our students are really doing. I just know that not everybody takes a test well, and we could have very talented students going under the radar because they're fully being evaluated on their test scores. So I don't know the answer, but I know that it's not just testing.
And turning to another issue, Kansas is experiencing low unemployment rates and employers are struggling to find qualified workers, especially in the technical and skilled trades. How do you see the school district helping to meet the business community's future workforce needs?
Yeah, so I know that there's a lot of work being done around this at Blue Valley right now. They just added a fire science program and some other experiential learning programs at the school district. And they continue to, as well as other districts around Johnson County. We need to be not just pushing college track education as being the one way to go. We need kids to be prepared coming out of Blue Valley with skills that we know that employers want, like team building or communication skills that they've shown, and the Kansas Department of Education was talking about this at their when they went around the state a couple of weeks ago, that these are things employers want and that they don't see coming out of high school. So teaching these intangible skills in the schools is helpful, and then also enhancing our experiential learning, our partnerships with, whether it be with unions around town for skilled labor and things like that would help our community, Johnson County as a whole, and the kids to come back into the community and build it for the future.
And other than funding, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing the school district right now?
So the greatest challenge facing the school district right now is the learning loss coming out of the pandemic. I know I feel like it's kind of an obvious answer, but just talking to administrators and teachers in the last couple of weeks, we had conferences. And we know that fourth quarter of the first few months of the pandemic, that fourth quarter, kids weren't learning anything. And then you're building on that in the next semester in your math classes, right? Or your science classes, and it builds over time. And so then you come back and you take Algebra 2, or you take chemistry, and you didn't learn everything that you were supposed to learn before. Learning builds upon itself, and so the kids are behind. And so how do we circle back? How do we get them up to speed on that stuff while still moving them forward? So to me, that's the biggest issue right now, like you said, other than funding, as well as the mental health coming out of the pandemic. I passionately believe that we need to be addressing that and continuing to normalize it, because everybody experiences it, mental health issue at one time or another, and so having open communication about that for students, administrators, teachers, everybody, families, is extremely important.
And my last question for you, what makes you uniquely qualified to serve on the board and most distinguishes you from your opponent in the race?
Sure. Well, my opponent has withdrawn, as you know, from the race. But I do still believe that what uniquely qualifies me as a candidate is I currently work full-time in a youth-serving nonprofit. We extend the learning that a school district does to after school, and doing the same things as far as workforce development, healthy living, tutoring, and things like that. We're extending the school day. And so what I'm doing every day is talking about funding sources that will give us, adequate resources to do these items after school and build upon what school districts are doing. So I think that uniquely qualifies me. But also, I grew up in Johnson County, and I, for a short period of time, moved to St. Louis to educate my kid, and my husband's job took us there. But we lived in St. Louis for 3 years. And I learned a lot about the public school district in St. Louis that was completely different from the school districts that we had experienced here in Johnson County. So I know there's other ways of doing things, and when you come in from the outside, you have a different perspective where you might see some sort of low-hanging fruit that you could affect change. And so I feel like I bring some unique ideas with me also, from not being just ingrained fully my whole life.
Well, Gina, I want to thank you for spending some time with us today. And before we close, I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to provide any final thoughts if you'd like to.
Thanks for having us today, or having me today. I appreciate everything that the Overland Park and Johnson County Overland Park Chamber and Johnson County Policy Institute does for our community. So thanks for having me.
Well, you're welcome. Just as a reminder, advance voting by mail begins on Wednesday, October 13th. Advance voting in person begins on Saturday, October 23rd. And of course, Election Day is Tuesday, November 2nd.